Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geostrategic Podcast. Thank you for watching or listening to the podcast. 413 to 0. That isn't just a vote. It's a massive shift in the global order. Russia has officially authorized military force beyond its borders, putting the Baltic states and NATO directly in the crosshairs. Is this the exact same pretext we saw before Ukraine, or is Putin testing Article 5? We're breaking down the law that just changed everything. But first, hit that like button. Share this with anyone watching the news and subscribe so you never miss a briefing. This is a huge development, and I want to turn the floor over to you. Is the world ready for what's coming next? No theory is too wild? I want to hear your take. Drop a comment below right now. Let's get a real conversation started. Now let's get into the details.
Yeah, so to really grasp the gravity of this, we have to look directly at the mechanics of what the State Duma just executed. I mean, the lower house of the parliament didn't just pass a typical bill. They basically rewired the legal triggers for their entire military. When you see a vote pass 413 to 0, with, not a single abstention, you aren't witnessing a real legislative debate.
It's just a rubber stamp.
Exactly. You are watching this meticulously engineered display of political theater drafted straight out of the Ministry of Defense. They amended the existing on-security law to explicitly grant leadership the legal right to use armed forces extraterritorially.
Okay, but I want to pause right there because this is where I'm getting stuck. They are already operating militarily outside their recognized borders. That's not a secret to anyone watching the news. So why bother with the bureaucratic paperwork now? I mean, authoritarian regimes don't usually need a permission slip to project power.
Right.
So what is the actual strategic value of formally amending this law today?
Well, it's a very fair question, and the answer really lies in how bureaucratic states justify mobilization to their own internal structures. The previous framework of that on-security law focused heavily on national defense, protecting the sovereign borders of the state from a direct attack.
Yeah, repelling an invasion.
Right, exactly. But what this amendment does is shift the justification away from national defense and toward, individual protection. The text specifically authorizes military intervention in cases where Russian citizens are detained or subjected to criminal prosecution by foreign legal bodies.
So if I'm understanding the latest info correctly, is this essentially creating a global, heavily armed, get-out-of-jail-free card? But instead of lawyers, Russia is authorizing the military to enforce it.
I mean, I wouldn't call it a get-out-of-jail-free card. That almost implies a legal loophole. This is much more insidious than that. It's a complete rejection of international jurisdiction.
Wow.
Yeah, the law specifically targets decisions issued by foreign courts or international judicial bodies that lack UN Security Council backing, or basically bodies where Russia does not participate.
Okay, let's look at the systemic impact of that. If I'm tracking the mechanism here, it's like passing a municipal law that says you are legally allowed to violently repossess your neighbor's property if you feel you were wronged. Like completely bypassing the local courts or the police.
Exactly.
The danger isn't just that you might successfully take the property today. The real danger is that you are formally normalizing the theft for tomorrow. It just destroys the underlying agreement of how society resolves disputes.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. This amendment effectively states that if a foreign legal body, say, like a European court, attempts to hold a Russian citizen accountable, Moscow now possesses the domestic legal green light to deploy the military in response.
Which is wild.
It is. They are substituting diplomatic channels and international law with the explicit threat of armed force.
And if the legal trigger is detained citizens, we have to follow the causality there. We have to look at where Russian citizens or ethnic Russian populations are currently navigating tense legal and political environments. And that points a massive, unavoidable arrow right at the Baltic states.
It absolutely does. And this is where the legislation begins to actively challenge the post-Cold War security architecture. The explicit justification cited in the explanatory notes of this bill is the protection of ethnic Russian populations abroad.
Right.
If you examine the demographics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, there are significant ethnic Russian populations residing there. By formally tying the deployment of extraterritorial military force to the protection of those specific demographics, this law places a permanent legalized crosshair on the sovereignty of those nations.
But the Baltics aren't just independent nations. They are fully integrated NATO members. And I think anyone following geopolitics knows what Article 5 is the principle of collective defense. By codifying this, aren't they drawing a direct line to test NATO's Article 5 guarantees?
They are. You've hit on the exact geopolitical pressure point this law is designed to exploit. The objective of hybrid warfare isn't necessarily to defeat an alliance militarily, it's to break its decision-making capability.
Right, create paralysis.
Precisely. If a hostile action is highly localized and wrapped in the legal guise of, say, a citizen rescue mission, it forces NATO into a brutal dilemma. If the alliance responds with overwhelming collective force, they risk triggering a broader, potentially nuclear conflict over a seemingly minor localized dispute.
But if they hesitate?
Right, if they hesitate, or if the requirement for unanimous consensus breaks down because some member states view the incursion as just a police matter rather than an armed attack, then Article 5 is exposed as hollow. The deterrence factor vanishes overnight.
So the goal is to manufacture a localized crisis that completely paralyzes a global alliance. But looking at the historical context from recent updates, this strategy isn't hypothetical. Like, this isn't just a theory for future operations. We've seen this exact playbook before.
We absolutely have, and it's vital to recognize the pattern here. The rationale of protecting citizens abroad was the primary narrative framework used to legitimize the start of hostilities in the Donbas region in 2014. And, it was heavily leaned upon again during the initial phases of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
They relied heavily on passportization, right? The strategy of flooding a neighboring region with Russian passports, turning the local population into legal citizens, and then claiming the military had to cross the border to protect them.
Precisely. They create the legal vulnerability, and then they exploit it. But what makes this recent State Duma vote so alarming is the transition from an ad hoc strategy to codified national doctrine.
Making it official everywhere.
Yeah. In 2014, the justification was heavily localized to the specific context of Ukraine. By passing this new legislation, they are officially declaring that the playbook used in Ukraine is now standard operating procedure for any region on the globe where their citizens reside. It signals a deliberate, permanent expansion of their declared security interests.
They took a localized military deception and basically etched it into stone. But here's where the narrative hits a massive wall of reality, and frankly, where I get genuinely confused by the strategy. We are looking at a meticulously drafted legal framework designed to challenge the largest military alliance in human history. Yet, simultaneously, the latest info shows that the very same military apparatus is struggling with the most basic, fundamental elements of logistics.
Oh, the juxtaposition is staggering. On one hand, you have the political elite projecting an image of unstoppable global reach. On the other hand, you have the Russian leader openly acknowledging severe supply chain failures during a recent, highly publicized meeting with the governor of the Ivanovo region.
And for those who might not know, the Ivanovo region is historically the textile heartland of the country. And in this meeting, it was openly conceded that they are failing to adequately supply their armed forces with domestically produced uniforms.
The admission is incredibly telling. I mean, modern warfare is a game of industrial attrition. It requires massive, sustained manufacturing capabilities. If the historic textile center of your country cannot weave enough cotton or synthetic blends to clothe the soldiers currently deployed, well, it reveals a profound structural rot within the military-industrial complex.
And let's dig into the why of that structural rot, because this isn't just a minor supply chain hiccup caused by a bad fiscal quarter. There was a recent decree issued by the government that explicitly banned the purchase of foreign gear for the military, right?
Yeah.
The mandate was designed to force total reliance on domestic production, like a move toward autarky.
Right. The intent behind the decree was to insulate the military from international sanctions and, demonstrate industrial self-sufficiency. But in practice, it achieved the exact opposite.
It backfired.
Completely.
Yeah.
It exposed how deeply dependent their manufacturing sector had become on imported materials, foreign machinery, and global supply chains. When you sever those ties by decree and your domestic industry hasn't seen meaningful modernization in decades due to systemic corruption, the production lines simply grind to a halt. The leadership literally had to state on the record that not everything that needs to be done has been done in this direction.
So explain the strategic logic to me here, because the contrast is so jarring. You pass a law that aggressively postures for a multi-front extraterritorial war against a unified, technologically advanced NATO alliance.
Right.
But at the exact same moment, you are broadcasting to the world that you cannot manufacture shirts, pants, and boots. If everyone, including NATO intelligence, can clearly see that your logistical foundation is crumbling, what is the value of passing the law? Why broadcast a bluff that transparent?
Because in the realm of geostrategy, the threat itself is a weapon. regardless of the immediate logistical capacity to execute it. By formalizing this legal architecture, they impose a massive psychological and financial tax on their adversaries.
A tax? How so?
Well, think about the reaction in the Baltic states right now. The moment this law passes, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania cannot simply dismiss it as a bluff.
Right, because the risk is too high.
Exactly. The risk of ignoring it is existential. So what happens? They have to increase defense spending, they have to mobilize reserves, they have to petition NATO for more forward-deployed troops, more air defense systems, more intelligence assets.
So they are forced to treat the legal document as a physical mobilization.
Yes. And that process requires an enormous expenditure of political capital, time, and resources from the entire NATO alliance. The goal of this legislation isn't necessarily to launch an invasion tomorrow morning. The goal is exhaustion.
Wow.
It forces the West to exist in a permanent state of high alert, navigating a constant fog of legal ambiguity and localized tension.
It's asymmetric warfare applied to bureaucracy. I mean, it costs the State Duma nothing but ink and paper to vote 413-0. But it costs NATO billions of dollars and endless diplomatic wrangling to continuously counter the threat that ink represents.
That is the ultimate mechanism of this strategy. You project the ambition of a superpower, forcing your adversaries to react to that ambition, even while your domestic reality looks more like a hollowed-out state struggling to maintain basic industrial output. However, it's crucial that we don't underestimate the long-term danger either.
Because the law isn't going anywhere.
Exactly. While the logistics are currently failing, the legal scaffolding is now permanently in place. If, say, years from now the supply chain issues are mitigated, the paperwork to authorize an advance into sovereign territory has already been signed, sealed, and delivered.
The infrastructure for the crisis is built. It's just waiting for the resources to fund it. And that reality leaves you, the listener, with a profound dynamic to consider as you watch these geopolitical maneuvers unfold.
It really leads directly to the core question we have to grapple with moving forward. If a nation spends its political capital constructing the legal architecture to confront NATO, while its industrial base is visibly failing to clothe its own soldiers, is this legislation truly a preparation for an imminent catastrophic war? Or is it the ultimate form of geopolitical bluffing designed to drain the West without firing a single shot?
That is the tension we are going to be living in for the foreseeable future. A massive thank you to everyone for tuning in, bringing your curiosity, and exploring the mechanisms behind these headlines with us. Thank you for watching or listening to the podcast. If you want to keep untangling these complex global shifts and uncovering the why behind the what, make sure to check out the other deep dives and podcasts on our channel. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning the narrative.
See you in the next one.